All right. So thank you all for being here today and hopping on. I know this was a little out of the blue to get this conversation, but I did promise that we would come back to discuss the concepts prior to the final applications being submitted. And we have some design concepts from VDOT that we can share with you now that we've done a little bit more work on moving towards an application and selecting an alignment. So looking forward to sharing that with you all today. I have some information from VDOT. I did share this with Michael, and hopefully Chuck, it got passed on to you, but I'm relying pretty heavily on VDOT to be leading a lot of the discussions that we're having today about some of these other discussion points. Just a reminder where we are in the process. We did submit pre-applications, and so the next step will be to continue working with VDOT and the localities and our MPO policy board to get some additional information to submit the final applications. So we have some preliminary concepts. We'll be working to refine those with VDOT, and those will go into the final application submissions, which are due on August 1st. And from there, we will basically sit and wait to hear back on the projects that are identified for recommended funding once the projects are evaluated. I did email the committee, but I just wanted to make sure that you all, that we had a chance to talk about this, because there were some factors, as comprehensive as we tried to be, as far as having these discussions with the committee and with the public beforehand. There were still a couple of things that came up kind of near the end of the process that we didn't necessarily have time to discuss with you all as a group that I think factored into the policy board's decision. So I wanted to make sure that we at least had a chance to review those with you all. First of all, I wanted to reassure anybody who was concerned, especially looking at the historic significance of the Woolen Mills area, that the historic resources in the area will be evaluated as part of the environmental assessment that's conducted. So if there's any mitigation that's needed or any efforts to protect historic resources throughout that area, that will be part of the project. So just wanted to make sure that was noted. One of the other things that we discussed at the policy board meeting that was a little bit, it came up a little bit in a day or two before the policy board was asked to make a final decision, is that there was a lot of discussion around the potential environmental mitigation that might be needed given the floodplain at both of the locations. And so one of the things that we had discussed with VDOT is that the risks of there needing to be some sort of environmental mitigation was a little bit higher at the East Market Street site. But one of the significant considerations was that there were much more straightforward opportunities to make adjustments in the alignment if mitigation was necessary at that site. So there was a greater chance that the alignment would not be as precise as we had planned at the East Market Street site. It just was also a site that had a lot more opportunity for flexibility if the design needed to be altered to mitigate some of those environmental risks. And then one really important factor that came up is that there was some discussion about the ongoing maintenance of the bridge. And what we were told from VDOT as they had some of these discussions with their bridge design departments is that VDOT would not be able to guarantee maintenance of a cable-stayed bridge design. It's just a little bit outside of a traditional bridge design. It would take more resources for them to maintain it. And so if we wanted to construct a cable-stayed bridge design or something that was non-traditional, those would be considered special structures, and the localities would need to commit to providing the ongoing maintenance, including inspections of those. And there was just a lot of uncertainty on what kind of commitment that would need to be specifically funding wise from the localities if they wanted to move forward with one of those bridge designs. VDOT is able to provide the maintenance for the traditional or arched truss style bridges though. So that was also a factor as we considered what could feasibly be implemented and supported by the localities. any questions on those before we look at?
Yeah,
some-
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. No?
Okay.
Okay. All right,
Andy,
yeah,
I think,
Thank you.
I don't think we've seen the drawings yet as part of the meeting, but you provided them, I think, to staff ahead of time. But I'm
Okay,
trying
great.
to,
Thank you.
I'm trying to wrap my head around
You too.
how, like, environmental mitigation is more straightforward at the East Market Street site. If that was the design that had one of the trusses or one of the bridge piers in the river, and now it kind of looks like there might be three, based on the drawings that were provided ahead of time. So I don't know that we can fully unpack that on this slide or even in this meeting, but I'm a little bit.
Hey, Tim, the entire, in the East Market Street, the entire park is in the floodplain. So all those structures would be in the floodplain.
Well, floodplain is important, but I think what I'm seeing in the drawings was something like three of the bridge, piers or structures in river. I think in river is more of the point I'm bringing attention to.
They're not in the waterway per se, they're in the island in the middle of the waterway. That makes sense. They're not technically, they're not in the river itself, they're in the island.
And I guess that's different than being, fully in the water, but certainly there's going to be, just growing consideration of, I think, flood resilience and, more frequent, more intense flooding is something we're seeing, anecdotally and from a data
Correct.
standpoint.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not trying to dive too far into that topic, but it just seems like we submitted for a project with one of those, and now there might be multiple. So, the process of how that changes or those details come about, it's all a little bit confusing. If there's time for discussion on that, as part of Sandy's presentation or just at any point today, that could be helpful.
Yeah, Chuck, there's a question in the chat from Jessica as well. So it might be helpful to zoom out a little bit and explain, what those environmental concerns might be and what were the factors that led to, some mitigation needing to be considered as a contingency for either of these connections.
Basically, we're going to have to analyze what the impacts are at either. We would have had to do it at either location. What we wanted to do is make sure that we focused on one location as opposed to looking at two locations, because that was what the feasibility study was trying to do. So what we're looking at is for this concept, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring this back to you now is the initial concept that the consultant came up with was looking at cost and of the structure itself and how much it would cost to try to get the cost down as low as possible. The more piers you put in, the shorter the spans are, and the less the cost of the structure is going to be. Every pier is going to have an issue in that we're going to have to analyze it. It's going to be impacting the floodway, not necessarily the river. And it will be a problem. It will be a structure that could catch debris during flood stage. So those are things we're going to have to take into consideration when we do the hydraulics analysis. And those would be items that we would need to clear following a significant flood event. One of the reasons we wanted to bring this out to you today was to, this option that they showed here has 5 piers. And the concepts that Sandy sent out, that's just what they put together. It's significantly different than the original one, which had 1 pier, but it's significantly cheaper, and it would mean the application would be more competitive. And we're working with the bridge section on what the optimal solution is, but we wanted to bring it out to you to get your thoughts on it, because we can reduce the number of piers, but it makes the bridge section deeper. So the beams or whatever the truss mechanism that you use to go from pier to pier would need to be higher, deeper, or you'd have to provide more of them. So that's some of the questions we wanted to get answers on today.
Chuck Dick Ruffin here. It looks like the bridge in this design would be straight without a bend.
Correct.
In the island. Is that correct?
Correct, because it's the shortest distances would be a straight line, as opposed to having the bend like we had previously shown. And with multiple piers, you want to try to go straight across. With the single pier, we can go part way and then bend it and go the other half of the way. With this one, we're looking at going straight across because it's easier to construct and it's less expensive. And some of the feedback we got at the meeting with the policy board was that they wanted to try to do what they needed to do to get the bridge funded. Because otherwise we're just spinning our wheels if we don't get put together a good application. But I want to make sure it's going to be something you guys are going to want to.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, if I could just jump in there, I think that's important, Chuck, and I appreciate that explanation. I just think, as you said, this is a significant change or it's significantly different. And I just wonder, this is not what, the public was able to view or consider or analyze or provide feedback on. And it seems like you described it as like a cheaper and more environmentally impactful option too, as opposed to, what was considered at option 2 or at option 1. So I don't mean to be, taking up all the oxygen in the room about that subject, but it just seems like a pretty major change, and feel like this check-in with these folks on this call is probably not enough, taking the temperature of how the public and public officials and decision makers feel about this change. But I do support, obviously, strengthening the application however possible.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear if there were other perspectives as well. Peter asked a question about, do you know what the distance is between the piers shown here, Chuck, by chance? I don't have the.
It's just under 100 feet.
Just under 100 feet. Okay.
Yeah, it's like 92 feet or something like that, I think.
Yeah. And our supervisor, Malik, okay. I know I muted you at one point. I think there was some background noise. Go ahead and unmute you if you're able to, or you can press *6 on or *7. Forget which one it is. It's one of those to unmute if you'd like to. Do you have any, from an elected official perspective, do you have any thoughts on, the significance of this change?
I don't have any thoughts. I knew that there was going to be much more detailed design. So these are the kinds of changes I was sort of expecting.
Okay.
But I will certainly look forward to meeting with the engineers and learning more about it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
This is Stuart. The Woolen Mills side, the bridge exits at the same location, but on the other side of the river, that exits at a different location.
Right.
Further down the trail. Is that right? That is what allows the bridge to be straight instead of the curve.
We had a diagram. There's a diagram that shows both of them, and basically, I think the termini are about the same. We basically went across the triangle, so we took the hypotenuse instead of putting the two legs together. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so instead of having this bend in the middle, it's kind of going
straight across
right there. Yeah.
I mean, it seems to make more sense to be straight. I always thought the bend was a little odd.
And I'm not sure if maybe Tim or Kevin or Chuck or Michael, there's a question in the chat about the who's responsible for clearing the debris, and will the impacts to wildlife be evaluated prior to construction of this design?
Well, we're going to analyze it based on time of year restrictions and stuff for the area, and we'll look at the historic resources in the area to make sure we're not impacting those. We'll look at the hydraulics of the river itself to make sure that we're not impacting that. We will have to do a detailed H&H study to meet the requirements because of the elevation of the bridge itself. And all that stuff's going to be done as part of the project if it's selected for funding.
Yeah. It sounds though that there is potentially the option to come back to them and say, we'd really like to reduce this to less piers on the island. And I think maybe one of the things we need to know from this group is if that's something that is a priority for you all, or that you think should be a priority.
Can you hear me, Sandy? This is Chris from the city.
Yep, I can hear you, Chris. Go ahead.
I think kind of to Lisa's question, my comparison here, just as a general, would be Freebridge. I think Freebridge has 2 piers like in the water. This one here would have the 1 or 2 on the island. I would imagine it's the maintenance end of this question that decides, who clears those things. Is 2 piers going to collect more junk than 1? People could look at the Freebridge records and see, well, how often does that thing really catch a lot of debris? We all have seen the railroad thing catches a lot of trees over time. Sometimes they break loose, sometimes they don't. So in terms of whether to choose more maintenance and who's going to do the maintenance and how often stuff's going to get caught under them, I don't really have a preference. I guess we would at least want to kind of know that going forward to budget for maintenance, whoever's going to do the maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on the piers?
So adding these piers means presumably a higher clearance above the water, which also has a resilience element to it that's very important. Is there like a geometric way to know like where that sweet spot is between less vertical elements that could catch debris and optimal clearance, both?
I don't know. I mean, the tie down point on the west end is in the 100-year floodplain. We'd have to come out. That's a fixed point. Once we leave that point, we're going to come up to meet the ADA requirements at whatever the maximum grade we can, basically less than 5%. So that's going to sort of dictate where we can go from that perspective. The original design had you were 1 foot above, the bridge deck was 1 foot above the high water elevation at the center pier, but you were from there heading to East Market Street, you were basically in floodplain. With this one, I mean, it just depends on what the grade is coming out. I mean, because you basically can't change grade in mid-span. You're going to basically change grade at a pier, or change grade at a pier. So it's possible that we could come out of the water faster, especially if you have a shallower bridge depth. But I don't know if there's a sweet spot regarding that and debris removal.
And Chuck, just so we're clear to understand the implications, if we reduce this from 3 piers in the island to 2, for example, that will have a cost increase, correct?
Yes, because the typical section for the bridge, the depth of the bridge would have to increase because your piers would, I mean, your trusses would have to get deeper.
Okay.
So actually it would, yeah. I mean, the grade's still going to make a difference coming out off of that western tie down point. And that's because that's a fixed point. So it's just a matter of how quickly we can come up from there and to get out of the floodplain.
Mm-hmm. From those of you who are expressing concerns about this, does moving to 3 to 2 make a significant difference, or is it really just anything beyond 1 is going to be a significant concern since that wasn't part of the original project?
This is Lisa, and I'm sorry, I was a little bit late getting on the meeting, so I might have missed this, but what is the cost difference? Like what are we talking about here? Like per pier, how much does it reduce the cost of the bridge to add these piers in?
I mean, I don't have fixed cost yet. I mean, we haven't gotten to that point. I just got these designs this week. And I've been talking with my bridge guys, actually talked with him earlier on, because he had concerns about the typical cross section of the bridge. And he said he was recommending 3 beams instead of 2 beams, which the consultants developed. So we're still going back and forth on a lot of that stuff. If you add a pier, you're narrowing the bridge depth. So and that's the most expensive part of the bridge is your spans, not the piers.
Okay, and did I understand that if there are more piers, the elevation of the bridge can be higher off the water than what we were told?
You can change the grade on the between one span, but you can only change the grade at a pier. So the maximum we can go up is 5% from the tie down point. And I'd have to do the math to see what that distance would need to be to get out of the floodplain at 5%.
So the more piers you have, the more opportunity you have to get the additional clearance over the river, because you can
Correct.
You have more connection points to increase or adjust the height.
It will allow us to get out of the floodplain sooner than later.
One thing I'm struggling with is it's hard. We don't know what the impacts are until you get the funding and you do the studies. So I don't personally know what wildlife are using that island, for example, but I'm sure that there are some. And so I can't in the abstract say 1 pier is better than 3 piers because I don't have all the information either, you know. My gut feeling is that 1 pier is better than 3 piers, and that's what we had discussed, but without really knowing all of the information about the hydrologic impacts and the likelihood of catching debris and who's going to deal with the debris. Those are all important things that I feel like we kind of need to know to make a decision about this.
Yeah. Supervisor Malik, do you want to? And then we'll come back to that, Lisa. But go ahead, Supervisor Malik.
Thank you. I do remember asking lots of questions in detail, looking for these kinds of answers, and was told rather emphatically, and I think everybody was who were asking the same type of questions, that this is the kind of thing that is determined at design. And so as I said before, I don't think that this is a surprise, and I think it puts everything in jeopardy if people are thinking they're going to somehow change what was already chosen in order to go forward. So I've been hoping for this bridge since 2002. And I think that we have a really good chance of getting a wonderful bridge that may not be exactly what somebody would have chosen, but we have lots of experts and engineers to make sure that it's going to be structurally and environmentally proper. So I think I understood this meeting was to sort of share what information we had so far. And it sounds like everybody's talking about going back and changing everything, and that concerns me tremendously.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is really to show where we are right now with the VDOT process and to provide any feedback. So if we need to make some adjustments or if there are things that are important to VDOT or that we want to make sure it's considered. So we're not going to redesign this bridge, obviously, but we want to know if there are things that are important that we need to consider, especially from, being able to feel like the elected officials that need to provide support are able to do that. So I appreciate your comments, Supervisor Mallett. Chuck, do you know, does VDOT do the maintenance as far as clearing the debris for these, or is that locally
on some of our projects? I mean, we
Okay.
do if it impedes the flow of I mean, we've done it throughout on Prophet Road. We had to do that one a couple years ago. So we do clear the debris if it becomes a problem for the flow of water down a river. So, or underneath the bridge. So that is something that's normally done. It's not done every storm, but it would be done if it becomes a problem.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments right now? Okay. All right, let's go on. I'm going to show you the renderings so we can, and we have some follow-up questions on those. This is a little bit different than maybe I had envisioned. So I fully expect there to be maybe some reactions that this was something that you were expecting or was not. But Chuck or Michael, do you want to talk about the bridge design? And then the other thing that we wanted to talk about a little bit was some of these other design elements that we should be discussing that you all want to might have some feedback on as far as what this bridge looks like in its final stage, as far as surface treatments, pier treatments, lighting, any other design considerations.
Yeah, this is just basic, typical of the bridge with the beams, which is if you go with multiple piers, the beams are even cheaper than the truss. If you go with fewer piers, then the truss becomes the cheaper option. But we just wanted to show this one as the least expensive one, with the railing, and this has a concrete deck. Now the difference between what we had sent you before, Sandy, and what we have now is this one has two beams, whereas bridge section has commented back that it would have to have three to actually be rated appropriately. And I just got some comments back from Bridge, like I said, less than an hour ago. So we're still having a discussion about those, but this was like I said, they came up with this concept of the least expensive option that would span the river with the multiple piers.
So am I understanding correctly, Chuck, that if we move to a fewer number of piers, we would be more likely to move to the more industrial style truss bridge?
I necessarily wouldn't be industrial style.
Okay.
If you look at the bridge, there's an arch bridge, a truss bridge across the toll road. I don't necessarily have, there's probably some on other rivers that is a white truss. It's actually got an arch in the middle of it. And it looks really nice. That crosses the toll road up the Dulles Toll Road in Northern Virginia. And it's a good example of a truss bridge. I think we had some at some of the early meetings when we were talking about the bridge across the 29 at Hydraulic. We had some good examples of some structures across bridges across the road, and those are generally truss bridges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons I brought that up, and I'd like to hear from the group on that as well, if that's significant. But one of the things that I heard in the survey was some people liked that a truss style bridge would fit more with the sort of the historic identity of the woolen mills area. They felt like that would sort of fit in a little bit more with the other structures that are in there. But I would certainly like to hear whether or not that's something that's significant in y'all's opinion.
This is Dick. I don't feel it's terribly significant. I have crossed the bridge on the old railway bridge up in Poughkeepsie, New York, across the Hudson. It's a straight across bridge where the railway bridge. It's a wonderful experience. You go out on that thing. It doesn't matter that it's not an absolutely beautiful bridge, but it's a beautiful experience. Just being out there. And I would not want to risk losing the bridge altogether by trying to ante up to get a marginal improvement in appearance, yes, but the experience of being on that bridge, even a flat bridge is not terribly beautiful, I think outweighs we should go with it. That's my not very informed opinion, but that's the way I feel about it.
Thanks, Vic. Supervisor Malik, do you have your hand up again, or was it left over from the last time?
I'm sorry, I forgot to take my hand down.
Oh, no worries. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay.
This
No,
is
thank you.
Stuart. I would just, Mr. Ruffin, I think said it very well. Not the most beautiful bridge, but also the experience is more about the view and the access more than an architecturally beautiful bridge. It's more about the experience and the access, and we'd hate to lose it because of price, simply because it wasn't as beautiful as we might like if cost was no object.
Sure. Any other comments? Otherwise, Chuck or Michael, do you want to go through some of the additional design considerations?
Sure. Is this the only other slide you have? You have the next slide.
Yeah, no, I don't have the other slide that shows like the schematics. Do you want me to bring that one up?
I mean, you don't have to. Those were some other options. One of them shows the truss, and I forget what the third one was. But like I said, I've actually talked to the bridge engineer, and some of those would change anyway. We are looking at a precast or a concrete deck with the hand railing on this. Now, the hand railing design can be, this is just one that was shown. There's some different variations of this that have crosses in them and all kinds of, different kinds of designs in the railing itself that could be used for this. The deck itself will be 14 feet inside to inside. So you've got plenty of room to go across the bridge if you're on a bicycle or walking. That's pretty much all I have from a structural standpoint. Like I said, we were looking at whether you wanted to go with the number of piers was the big question, and we wanted to make sure that before we move forward, like I said, this is, if we went with 5 piers, it would be the cheapest one. We can go to 3, and then that's probably we'd end up going to a truss bridge, would be cheaper at that point. But we wanted to get your feedback on that before we made those kind of decisions.
This is Fran. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Fran.
So I think it's exciting to think about this little area being a cluster of bridge types. If we have this bridge, which folks think is very pretty and would be a nice experience, we have the railroad bridge right there in the same place. We have the new wool factory pedestrian bridge right there. So it would be a wonderful collection of bridge types.
Oh, that's a good thought.
Good point, Fran.
Peter, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll also just separately add the cast concrete I-64 bridge also over there. So lots of cool stuff.
Yes.
Hey, Chuck, are we going to be able to have that fence style rail, or is VDOT going to want an 8-foot or even one that curls over?
This is because you're not crossing a highway, you don't need to have the fence along the outside. So you basically can just go with a rail along the outside, as long as it meets the requirements for bicycles.
Yeah, something like this would have a really pretty thin cross section, and I think that's kind of cool, thinking about like less obscuring the landscape potentially, and also like connecting you with the sky and the environment a little more than you would have with the cage of a truss.
Yeah, as long as you're not worried about heights, because you're going to be a good ways up in the air.
Maybe it adds to the thrill a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
My wife would not go across it.
All right. Do you want to talk a little bit about, surface treatments for the bridge structure itself, or the pier treatments that could be considered?
I mean, there's not really a whole lot to discuss. Like I said, we're looking at mainly the concrete deck. Now it could be precast or it could be cast in place. We're looking at both options. The railing, this is just a design. There's several different types out there that we could look at and that could be considered, but they're all about the same price. So really, at this point, it doesn't matter. The color, again, that can be something that can be decided at a later time, both for the beams and for the railing. And that's pretty much all I have. I know they looked at a timber deck bridge, but we weren't going to use a timber deck at this location.
Chuck, this is Chris. Can the piers be done like we've done with retaining walls where they're concrete piers, but then you use those forms that make them look like field stone? That might be something just for aesthetics that could be looked at, like we did on the 250 bypass walls and interchange walls. Those are all just concrete, but they're stamped to look like stack stone. Yeah.
It depends on the type of design for the piers and how it's cast.
Right. But that could, we could look into that and ask the question, what's the cost, what's the benefit, and see if that's a worthwhile thing to do and if it's engineeringly feasible.
I mean, like I said, at this point, I don't know whether they're just showing a typical post, whether it's this kind or whether it's circular and the diameter and the size. At this point, we don't know. They did give some details on the foundations and how those are going to be built. And these would be built on top of the foundations. But decorativeness of the design of those, there is some flexibility there. I just, at this point, we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet.
Go ahead, Supervisor Mallett.
Thank you. A question just occurred to me, and that is, are the piers ever set with their point? If it's a square or a rectangle, for example, is the point ever set toward the current so that you have sliding, for things that bump into it, they would have a sliding side to keep on going, as opposed to a flat side if it was set perfectly parallel to the or right angles to the water flow, let's put it that way. And that's probably just irrelevant, but I wanted to share it anyway. Thank you.
We can I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't typically know. They're showing square here. Generally, haven't really seen square. Usually they're round. So in that case, there is no point. So because it's a circular object. So I really don't know. Can't answer that question. But I can ask the question of the consultants to see what they're going to come up with.
Did you have a follow-up comment, Supervisor Malik? I might have lowered your hand and you might have re-raised it. We'd also talked about lighting a little bit in the previous meeting and whether we wanted this bridge to be lit or not. And I'll apologize, I'm not very familiar with Albemarle's dark sky lighting, or I think there's an ordinance, but I don't know exactly what those terms are. But you know, assuming that this is going to be for a transportation purpose, it makes sense that there's some sort of lighting that's available. But yeah, any thoughts or comments or feedback on that?
I like the ones that are in the handrails. You know, you don't have elevated posts. I've seen a lot of bridges where they somehow tuck it into the tubing of the steel. So you get a soft glow on the deck and it doesn't shine out into everywhere. So again, I think Chuck and the consultants could say, here's a few options. And when we get to that point, design, pick the one. I guess one question you want to know right up front is lit or not lit. And then if you say lit, you get into the details of how to light it without violating dark skies and make it aesthetically. But I don't know if the decision's been made. Absolutely don't light it. And that's, if they know that, they don't have to talk about it.
Yeah. Chuck, at this point, is there's, oh, go ahead.
I would say, yeah, that's something we probably would need to know, because especially for something like this, you wouldn't want people being out there if it's dark in the middle of the night. So, And that would probably go for the whole entire trail section for this location. So
This is
They also need to know where to tap electricity if they needed it. You know, that's an
correct.
additional
I
thing.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Go ahead, Supervisor Malik, and then Derek, you can go when she's done.
My question really is for the city. I think that I would really appreciate input from the city staff and council about their desires on lighting, only because I hope we will not encourage people to party out there in the middle of the night. I would love to have it be a de facto dawn to dusk place, unless one brought one's own headlamp. And I don't know anything about the rules, but I expect the city has some thoughts about how they do their other trails, and this could hopefully be consistent with that.
We are looking at, when it used to just be the Riverview Trail, that's kind of a recreational trail. When you have like a John Warner Parkway trail and it's December at 5:30 and people chose to commute by bike, maybe it's a dawn to 9 p.m. type thing to allow any of those folks in the dead of winter. There's an hour or two where it's still valid to have the lighting, but we are still wrestling with that. We don't have a policy, but it would only be on major commuting level systems, not just, you know, trails in the woods kind of thing.
This is Dick. I think we all want to see some use of this pedestrian bridge by commuters, and they don't stop commuting in the winter. Come 5 o'clock, it can be very dark, and you've bicycled in, you need to bicycle back. Seems to me we need some lighting for safety purposes, particularly that long trail up to the point on the east side there. That just for safety, I would have thought we need some lighting, whether that can be controlled in terms of timing. But I have a concern if we had no lighting for the sake of people who might use it for commuting, especially in wintertime.
Sure. And Peter made a good point in the chat box that this is really intended to provide illumination for people who are using the bridge, not necessarily to illuminate the bridge itself. I think it sounds like maybe a good compromise would be to have lights that could be connected to timers so that they're not necessarily on by default, but could be programmed. I don't know how difficult that is, but does that feel like the general consensus?
This is Stuart. I would just add, I think commuters by bike or by foot, they're pretty savvy, and I think that they also bring their own lighting. So, you know, most people cycling at night have lighting. So I think it's important to have some lighting, but it's not a make or break situation.
I would also be interested to hearing, I know we have at least one or two women on this call that commute, if that feels like a different safety consideration versus bringing your own light versus having the light lit, especially, or the path lit already. Not to single anybody out, you don't have to answer. But
Sandy, I'll jump in since I'm usually the one who talks about that, but I actually want to talk about it from a different perspective. I think that, you know, biking is this kind of transportation option that's open to lower income folks, and they may not have the resources to buy their own lighting, and they may travel at times that don't match the 9 to 5 commute. So I want to encourage us to consider lighting at, you know, the appropriate lighting at all times for all users.
Good point.
yeah, and to be honest, I hadn't thought about how that would need to also be installed also along the trail itself, and that might be a slightly more challenging ask than along the bridge directly. I'm sorry, was there another comment that I talked over somebody?
Question.
Yeah.
Could solar power conceivably drive the lighting? Chuck, you may know. Does that work?
Yes, we'll have to look into it. I'm not sure. I know we do use solar for some things, and this could be one of those instances. The trail up through the woods, I don't think would be a viable because I don't think you get enough direct sunlight.
Right.
But the bridge itself, yes.
And some of the specifics can be ironed out a lot later. I think it's just generally that might increase the cost a little bit. So we want to make sure that we factor that in if that's something that we want to make sure is able to be incorporated.
I
Yeah,
just
and real-
need to know because we'll add a line item for lighting in the cost estimate. That's why I was asking the questions.
And to Chuck's point, in the solar point, with solar options these days, you can add stuff later, even if there's no wiring nearby. So if, for example, we decide put the thing up and figure out the lighting, the nice thing is even if we forgot to wire it, the bridge itself is a good candidate for solar. We've looked at those on our trails as well, so that could work out.
Thank you.
As
And
long as
there's
we can attach the lights to the bridge, that's going to be that tends to be a pretty questionable issue sometimes.
And then there's a question about the possibility of using motion sensing lights and whether that is something that either has been done or would potentially be feasible.
I'm not Chuck Proctor, but the the Tonsler Trail that we're building is going to be lighted, and it will have motion sensing lights that are two-phase. They'll have a real dim phase, which is their default, and when someone's present, they'll light up to the full lighting. So you can kind of see the landing strip, and as you get there, it lights you as you move through. There could be a cost factor, but it's conceivable to have motion sensing light, I would think.
This is your first step towards becoming Chuck Proctor, Peter. Career ambitions here. All right. Well, are there any other thoughts? I don't really, this was really the goal was, like Supervisor Malik said, to bring this information back to you and be able for us to hear some input and some responses to it in case there were comments that we needed to make back. I think we got some. It sounds like maybe there's not quite consensus on some of these other considerations, but it sounds like what I think that I'm hearing is that our goal is still to have as competitive of an application as possible. And, barring that this has significant detrimental impacts, that sounds like it's the goal from what I'm hearing in this group.
That states it well for me.
Agree.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, if you all have any other comments, you're welcome to stick around. Otherwise, we might, like I said, I just wanted to follow back up like we had discussed and bring this information back to you now that we have it. But really our next step is going to be to wait for the application portal to open back up, and then we'll be developing the final applications and submitting those. And hopefully we will all be crossing our fingers and our toes and, waiting to hear some potentially good news about funding, or at least learning more about how competitive this application was if we want to consider it for future rounds if we're not successful this round. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up?
Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome. Oh, hey, Kareem, I didn't see you come in. Hi. Well, thank you.
Sam.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Presumably, you'll have a more defined cost estimate at, when you submit the application. It would be interesting to see what that is when it's finally ready.
Sure. Chuck, do you have any sort of ETA on when that information will be developed? Usually it's pretty late in the process. From what I
Yeah, they're
remember.
working on it. They have, they really haven't, they were trying to get feedback on some of these thoughts that we had initially. So that's what we're going to go back, and then they'll refine it a little bit further, and then we'll start working on the cost estimate.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for being available. Again, I know this kind of came out of the blue, but we really appreciate all of y'all's engagement throughout developing this application and appreciate how interested you are in following it. And yeah, we'll keep you posted as we know more, but you're probably in for a long waiting period for a while at this point.
Thanks so much, Sandy.
Yeah. Thank you all. I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.